Hello everyone, welcome to the Jane's World of Defence podcast. I'm Peter Felsted, the editor of Jane's Defence Weekly, and I have with me today Nick Ferenza, my Europe editor, Gabriel Dominguez, my Asia Pacific editor, and Jeremy Binney, my Middle East and African editor. And as usual, we're going to be looking at some of the more salient stories that have come across our desk in the last few weeks. Now, first off, the INF Treaty, Nick. The US withdrawal from this treaty finally took effect on the 2nd of August. And of course, we've had a blame game that's followed on from that. The Russians are saying the Americans are the people that withdrew. The Americans are saying, well, it's Russian non-compliance through its development of the SSC-8, or that the Russians call the 9M729 ground-launched intermediate cruise missile. So where do we go from here? I mean, if we look at what the US Defense Secretary said on the 2nd of August, he said in a statement, "Now that we have withdrawn, the Department of Defense will fully pursue the development of these ground-launched conventional missiles as a prudent response to Russia's actions and as part of the Joint Forces' broader portfolio of conventional strike options." And when he mentions those ground-based missiles, of course, he's talking about missiles that have a range between 500 and 5,500 kilometres. So from a NATO perspective, how is the alliance responding to the demise of the INF Treaty?
Well, NATO actually, on the 2nd of August, in fact, at first I thought it was before the U.S. had even announced the formalization of the withdrawal. But anyway, I guess it was coordinated. Basically agreed with the U.S. So the other 27 NATO members agreed that Russia was to blame. And they put it in a broader context of Russian behavior, which includes
Annexation.
Exactly, and I guess beefing up their military in general. Now, NATO has not actually announced specifically what it's going to do, but it has said what it is considering. So they're looking at stepping up exercises, beefing up their intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, their air and missile defenses, and conventional capabilities. And also they want to make sure that the NATO nuclear deterrent, which is actually provided by the US, UK, and France, that it remains safe, secure, and effective. I mean, they're probably also referring to nuclear warheads, I think less than 200 warheads, which are at various bases in Europe. Also, they've basically said we still, if there is room for arms control, we still support that option. The NATO Secretary General said NATO would not mirror what Russia does, and that the Allies have no intention of deploying new land-based nuclear missiles in Europe.
But that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because this is a relatively new weapon system, the 9M729. The Russian MOD were just announcing more details of it at the start of this year when they claimed it was INF compliant. But now with the demise of the treaty, presumably if they finish the development of this missile, they can deploy it where they like, and surely NATO will have to respond to those potential deployments.
Yeah, I think as far as nuclear deterrence is concerned, they're going to have a very hard time getting any NATO ally, except maybe Poland, to land-based nuclear missiles. And Poland would be reluctant if it didn't have the support of other countries. So I think they're going to rely on submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which are probably the most important parts of the British and French deterrence, and also airdropped weapons.
Well, that sounds very Cold War, doesn't it?
It all sounds very much like the Cold War. But one thing, I was a student at the time of the Pershing II and ground-launched cruise missile deployments. And one thing that was quite interesting at the time, it was actually the Germans. In fact, Helmut Schmidt made a speech at the International Institute of Strategic Studies, fearing that Europe was somehow decoupled from the States, from the nuclear deterrent. But in fact, the Carter administration at the time, wasn't even keen on basing missiles on the ground in Europe, because they are actually more vulnerable there. I mean, just as they can reach Moscow, the Pershing IIs scared the Russians so much because they could reach Moscow within minutes. But by the same token, those missiles could be reached by, let's say, SS-20s at the time. So maybe basing missiles on the ground is not the best thing to do, or at least not the most stabilizing thing to do. The submarine-based deterrent is probably the least vulnerable of the options.
And what do you think it does to the overall military balance between Russia and NATO? I mean, we know that the Russians were very animated about the deployment of ballistic missile defense assets in Europe. We're talking about in Poland and Romania. That was something that they felt affected their strategic capability. If the gloves are off, so to speak, with the demise of the INF Treaty, do you think it's going to be easier for the Allies just to roll out that kind of thing, BMD assets?
It's not going to be as easy as that, but I mean, this is one of the options the Allies are looking at. And ironically, what the Russians feared all along has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, they were worried that somehow the limited NATO capability to defend against missiles coming from the southern region, the southeastern flank, that somehow that capability would threaten the Russian strategic nuclear arsenal. But now, without INF, and if they had not deployed the 9M729, they would not be facing one possibility, which is that NATO builds up its ballistic missile defense system to also try to neutralize the Russian nuclear arsenal.
Now, one of the aspects of the INF Treaty, which in some respects made it likely to be redundant anyway, was the fact that it didn't include China. But since the demise of the treaty, the Americans have talked about possibly deploying weapon systems that would be not INF Treaty compliant in the Asia-Pacific region, Gabriel. So what do you think that's going to do to the region?
Well, yes, that's right, Peter. Chinese recently heavily criticized statements made earlier this month by U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. During a recent trip to Asia, Esper said that following Washington's withdrawal from the INF Treaty, he would like the U.S. to deploy intermediate-range ballistic missiles in the Asia-Pacific. He didn't specify when or where this would happen, and he said that he has not yet discussed the issue with any of the U.S.'s allies in the region. But the statement was enough to trigger a very strong response from Beijing. China's foreign ministry, for instance, said that the country would not just sit idly by and allow another country to, quote-unquote, stir up trouble at its doorstep. The ministry also said that Beijing pursues a defensive military policy, arguing that all of China's land-based, both short and intermediate-range missiles are deployed within its own territory. This is why the Chinese are arguing that if the U.S. would deploy its IRBMs in the Asia-Pacific region, China would see this as an offensive move and would take countermeasures. Beijing, however, did not provide any details about what those countermeasures would entail.
Now, moving on to North Korea, I think I've lost count of the amount of ballistic and rocket missile tests that Kim Jong-un has let off over the last several weeks. President Trump says that's all fine because they're all short-range systems. So what's really going on here? I mean, we've seen new systems, haven't we?
Yes, that is true. We've seen about 3 new systems test fired within a month. I think North Korea appears to be following a twofold approach here. On the one hand, they're conducting their summertime drill, so it appears that they're using this as an opportunity to test new weaponry. On the other hand, Pyongyang seems to have chosen the timing of the missile test to send a warning against the latest joint U.S.-South Korean exercises that began on 5th August. Let's remember that North Korea has always been very critical of these drills, claiming that they are a rehearsal for an invasion of the North. In terms of the weaponry North Korea has been testing, it seems that they have tested new short-range missile systems, all of which have been fired from transporter erector launchers. The first one is the one called KN-23 by both South Korea and U.S. Forces Korea. This is an SRBM that has been tested 4 times already since the 4th of May. It has flown between 240 and 600 kilometers, with the latter distance meaning that it would be capable of reaching pretty much any area in South Korea. The missile resembles, and this is the interesting part, the 9M723 series of SRBMs used by the Russian Iskander system, and features what North Korea has described as a low-altitude gliding and leaping flight pattern that would make it harder to intercept than previous North Korean SRBMs. The second weapon here is what they have described as a large caliber, multiple launch guided rocket system. So this weapon has been tested twice since 31st July and has flown between 220 and 250 kilometers. Images released by North Korea show that these guided rockets were launched from a tracked TEL that is capable of deploying at least 3 of these weapons. South Korea, in the meantime, maintains that these weapons are just similar to SRBMs. And last but not least, North Korea recently fired a tactical ballistic missile that resembles some of those used by the U.S. Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, which is, by the way, also operated by the South Korean military. Pyongyang launched 2 of these missiles on the 10th of August, with each of them flying about 400 kilometers, and that means it's far enough to actually reach most sites in South Korea.
Now, obviously, this is all a bit disturbing for the South Koreans, not least of which the fact that they may be facing not just a barrage of unguided rocketry, but systems that actually could be more accurately targeted. I mean, President Trump's not worried, but surely they would be.
Absolutely. And we're talking here about the North Koreans potentially trying to target future F-35 bases. The North Koreans have been very critical of the South Koreans acquiring F-35s or possible missile defense systems being installed in South Korea. So those are all possible targets, of course, yes.
Okay. Now, on the 23rd of July, Pyongyang's Korean Central News Agency released partial images of what it described as a newly built submarine. Now, if, as many analysts suspect, this is a follow-on to the Gore-class boat, which has been used by the North Koreans to test submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and could therefore be perhaps a design that is somewhat more operational than experimental in nature, then that's surely a cause for concern.
Yes, absolutely. South Korea itself, after KCNA released those images, said that it believes that this submarine could have the capability of displacing more than 2,500 tons and of carrying up to 3 submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Let's not forget that the North Koreans have already developed a submarine ballistic missile called the Pukusong, which has a range of about 500 kilometers. What we don't know about the North Koreans is whether they have already developed a technology to actually miniaturize a warhead that can be fitted into a missile. That said, of course, this is a very alarming development for both South Korea, the U.S., and its allies in the region.
Okay, so, I mean, we're technically in a state of negotiation between North Korea and the United States. President Trump has said he's had some lovely letters from the guy. So what do you think these kind of developments could do with potential peace talks?
Well, that's difficult to predict as everything regarding North Korea. I mean, the country argues that regardless of the negotiations with Seoul and Washington, it still has the right, just like any other country, to develop and enhance what they say are conventional weapon systems. I personally think that because so little progress has been made in the denuclearization talks with the United States.
It's not going to happen, is it? He's not going to give up his nukes.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's definitely what Trump wants to achieve, but it doesn't seem likely at the moment. I mean, I think North Korea right now is trying to send the message that it is boosting its weapons arsenal in case diplomacy should fail. Most of these weapons mainly pose a threat to neighboring South Korea and Japan. So you can see these developments as North Korea's way of upping the pressure on the United States and South Korea into actually reaching a deal, of course, that would favor the North. At the same time, we have to look at these tests from the perspective that North Korea has not resumed testing intercontinental ballistic missiles or nuclear weapons. This has led Trump, as you said earlier, to say that, well, these are very standard weapons, and therefore he's not worried about them. And so far, nobody has said that the negotiations would not continue. As a matter of fact, in that letter you just referred to, Trump said that Kim expressed his intention of restarting negotiation as soon as the latest round of U.S.-South Korean exercises have finished. So it seems that there is still some room left for diplomacy at this moment, even though little progress has been made this year at least.
Okay, thank you. Right, Jeremy, we hear a lot of talk about robot wars, don't we? But in fact, in Libya, we've kind of got one, haven't we? Because we've got a bit of a UAV proxy war going on.
Yes, Pete, it might be a bit much to say it's actually a proxy war at this stage, because we might be seeing some direct hostilities between Turkey and the UAE right now. Right. So what appears to be happening is that both have deployed UAVs to Libya to support the rival factions in the current battle for the capital, Tripoli. We can't definitively say that this is what is happening, but what we do know is that the UAE has deployed Wing Loon UAVs to eastern Libya to support the Libyan National Army faction in the past against the Islamist militants. We know that because we broke the story using satellite imagery back in 2016, showing a combination of military aircraft which could only have come from the UAE. And that was deployed at an airport called Al-Qadim. Then earlier this month, the forces aligned with the Government of National Accord, who the LNA are fighting. So it's the GNA versus the LNA. The GNA releases a photo of a UAV it says is a Wing Loon from the UAE that they've shot down near Misrata in western Libya. And a missile, you can see a missile that has come off in the crash there, and that missile is pretty obviously a Norinco Blue Arrow 7. So it's a Chinese missile. It goes on a Chinese UAV. However, if you look at the UAV itself, it's got winglets on the end of its wings in the photos. So it's much more likely a Wing Loon 2, and that is only known to be in service with the UAE because we've had published a satellite imagery showing the Wing Loon 2 at the remote Kusawira airbase in Abu Dhabi. Okay, so looks like the UAE's got Wing Loon and Wing Loon 2s out there in Libya. Meanwhile, the LNA is saying they carried out an airstrike against Al Nimwa airport, which is 70 kilometers south of Misrata, to take out Turkish UAVs and control stations that have been deployed there. There's no real confirmation that they were deployed there, and really the only evidence that we've seen of Turkish UAVs in the country so far is some footage that appears to show a Bayraktar TB2, which is an armed type of UAV, flying around Tripoli. Now, whether it was in Tripoli or not remains a little bit open to debate. But what I think we can definitively say is that someone on the GNA side has got a precision airstrike capability. And we know this because they said they carried out a airstrike against Al Jufra Air Base, which is controlled by the LNA, on the 29th of July. Now, part of that strike took out two IL-76 transport aircraft that were allegedly bringing in weapons and mercenaries for the LNA. But they also said they hit a hangar where foreign UAVs were being stored, and presumably a reference to the Wing Loons. Now, we got some satellite imagery, post-strike satellite imagery, and we had a good look at that. And we could see that both the hangars were hit by NATO back in 2011, but one of them had a smaller hole, very precise pinprick sort of hole. And that really doesn't conform with what we know about the GNA Air Force, which really now only operates L-39 jets with unguided weapons. But this would fit with the Rocket Sam MAML laser guided bomb that is launched from the Bayraktar TB2 UAV.
So the age of UAVs in combat truly upon us, and not just for reconnaissance duties. Okay, thanks for that. Well, I think that's all we've got time for here. Thanks to Nick, Gabriel and Jeremy for joining me. Thanks to Josh Wales for producing, and thank you for listening. Please go to janes.com to access these podcasts, or you can find them on Spotify, iTunes and SoundCloud.